Being you. I will be sharing the seventh principle this morning, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. This is a glorious statement, yet we make a profound mistake when we limit it to merely an environmental idea. It is so much more. It is our response to the great dangers of both individualism and oppression. It is our solution to the seeming conflict between the individual and the group. Our seventh principle may be our Unitarian Universalist way of coming to fully embrace something greater than ourselves. The interdependent web, expressed as the spirit of life, the ground of all being, the oneness of all existence. The community-forming power, the process of life, the creative force, even God, can help us develop that social understanding of ourselves that we and our culture so desperately need. It is a source of meaning to which we can dedicate our lives. Reverend Forrest Gilmore, the Shalom Community Center, Indiana, in Bloomington.
I'm Bob Dodson. I represent the Poor People's Campaign. I'm trying to organize people who are interested to go to Washington, D.C. for June 18th to a mass Poor People's Assembly to try to send a message to politicians about the concerns that we have. So it is not moral to deny health care, housing, or nutrition based on ability to pay. It is not moral to deny voting rights, civil rights, equal justice, or equal education to a certain group based on race or income. It is not moral to deny women the right to control their own bodies and lives. It is not moral to sacrifice the natural world on the altar of profit. It is not moral to pursue perpetual war and sell more weapons of mass destruction, or to pursue policies which perpetuate mass incarceration of our own citizens. The Poor People's Campaign seeks to shift the distorted moral narrative promoted by religious hypocrites that school prayer, sexual orientation, the right of women to control health care decisions, and gun rights are somehow central to a moral society. The campaign also hopes to shift the false narrative that most of our poverty is the result of bad personal choices and that the poor are to blame for their own poverty, to one that recognizes the systemic nature of poverty, racism, militarism, and environmental devastation. Poverty is the result of economic policies that promote exploitation of workers, allow disparities in educational opportunity, permit discrimination in hiring and wages based on sex, race, or past incarceration, and which deny the cost of child care when requiring poor women to work. It is the result of political decisions to follow policies of mass incarceration and spend most of our scarce resources on foreign wars, while allowing unchecked exploitation of our natural environment. The consequences of all these policies fall most heavily on the poor. The Poor People's Campaign is fighting for a just society where the rights of all persons are respected regardless of race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, or immigration status. It is fighting for a society where political rights like voting rights are protected, living wages are provided. The right to organize unions is protected. The environment is respected. And the economy ceases to be based on militarism and the exploitation of workers both here and abroad. Our goal is to create a fusion movement of people as well as groups working on some aspect of creating a more just society, whether this is some area of individual rights, such as race, sex, or sexual orientation, or political rights, voting rights, environmental protection, and climate justice or peace and justice. We can no longer work in our own silos. We can no longer allow lines of division like race, sex, sexual orientation to divide us. We need the mass mobilization of what is now one of the least politically active groups in our society, the poor and near poor. We hope to give a platform, inspiration, and respect to the voiceless and marginalized who need more from us than charity and soup kitchens. Our campaign is nonpartisan. To reach across political divides, it is critical to change the dialogue from one based on personal morality to one based on a foundation of fundamental values and social justice. I would like to invite you and other members of your church family to come to the June 18th, 2022 Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C. to support the movement, the principles, and the demands of the campaign, and to give a national platform to the people it represents. If your church cannot send its own delegation to Washington, I would like to ask your support by contributing a scholarship to subsidize a trip for others in the community who may not be able to come up with bus fare. A contribution can be made to the Indiana Poor People's Campaign, care of Broadway United Methodist Church in Indianapolis, with a note concerning how you would like the money to be used, whether for Terre Haute and the surrounding area or for the statewide effort. I will be working to, at very least, fill one bus to represent the Terre Haute area. A bus must have at least 25 people who plan to attend the rally and return to Terre Haute the next day. I realize that a 24-hour bus rally event may not work for many. You are welcome to arrange your own method and timetables of travel. Our secondary goal after the mass assembly is to establish a local permanent presence or cluster of committed individuals in the Terre Haute area who will work to mobilize and unite the poor and near poor of the community into a coherent political force for reform. This will include mobilizing voters for elections this fall. If you would like to learn more about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, I could leave a sheet and you could put your emails on that sheet and I will get back with you with more information. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen.
Our opening words are number 434 in the back of our hymnal. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. In our opening hymn, number 318, We Would Be One.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today.
transitional words are number 657 in the back of your hymnal. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged.
Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies.
Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities.
Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness.
Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies.
Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern.
Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction.
Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration.
Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness.
Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth.
Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world.
Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life.
Sophia Leon Fass. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Reverend Bill Breeden. He is a retired minister from the Bloomington congregation. We are looking forward, as always. Bill.
I want to introduce you to a couple of books today that I highly encourage you to read. One I just finished. It's called The Overstory by Richard Powers. Anybody seen this book? The Overstory by Richard Powers. Barbara Kingsolver calls it monumental, a giant fable of genuine truths. And I think it is. It's about trees. And Richard Powers writes, he's written many books, and he's a scientist and an author, and he writes about trees in a way that no one I have ever read has, maybe with the exception of who did Lord of the Rings and so forth. Tolkien, thank you, in a fable kind of thing. But this is a novel that is based in science and also in ecology and the present status of our world. And the other book is A Dream of Earth by Thomas Berry. It was published in 1988, I believe. This is a rather new book, 2018, but Thomas Berry's book, The Dream of the Earth, I picked it up as a result of reading this. It's been on my shelf for a long time, and I just started going back through it. I want to talk about trees. You and the tree in your backyard come from a common ancestor. 1.5 billion years ago, the two of you parted ways. But even now, after an immense journey in separate directions, that tree and you still share 1/4 of your genes. I had never known that before. Rabindranath Tagore said, trees are the earth's endless effort to speak to the listening heaven. No one really sees trees. We see fruit, we see nuts, we see the wood, we see shade, we see ornaments of pretty foliage, obstacles blocking the road or wrecking the ski slope, dark, threatening places that must be cleared. We see branches about to crush our roof. We see a cash crop, but trees are invisible. Rumi said, love is a tree with branches in forever, with roots in eternity, and a trunk nowhere at all. Thoreau said, shall I not have the intelligence with the earth? Am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? And what is this Titan that has possession of me? Talk of mysteries, think of our life in nature. Daily to be shown matter, to come in contact with it, rocks, trees, wind on our cheek, the solid earth, the actual world, the common sense. In the Overstory, Powers writes, "We all travel the Milky Way together, trees and humans. In every walk with nature, one receives far more than one seeks. The clearest way into the universes go through a forest wilderness." In a world of perfect utility, where everything we look at it as for its use for us. In a world of perfect utility, we too will be forced to vanish. One of these days, we will be forced to vanish if all we think about is utilitarianism. This is not our world with trees in it. It's a world of trees where humans have just arrived. The world had, when we arrived, human beings, the world had 6 trillion trees. When people showed up, that's how many trees covered this planet. Only half remain, about 3 trillion. Half again will disappear in the coming 100 years. Toynbee wrote, "Man achieves civilization as a response to a challenge in a situation of special difficulty which rouses them to make a hitherto unprecedented effort. We achieve civilization when we are confronted with a situation of special difficulty that arouses us to hitherto unprecedented effort." Climate change is an unprecedented problem, and ignoring it just doesn't work. It's obvious. If you live in the country, if you live in nature, you see it every day. It's hard for me to believe how much resistance there is to climate change by farmers. Same thing with evolution. I mean, they see evolution, they practice evolution in breeding, in planting, in germination. All of this is right there in front of our eyes. And yet, because of religious bigotry and some kind of blind ignorance, these things like climate change, like evolution, somehow become just myths that no one believes, or few believe. The best and easiest way to get a forest to return to any plot of cleared ground, says Powers, is to do nothing at all, and do it for less time than you might think. The forest will regain itself. In the Rig Veda, the Hindu Sanskrit hymns that are records going back roughly between 1700 to 1100 BCE, one of the oldest texts in the Indo-Iranian language, one of the oldest religious texts, is preserved by oral tradition alone and was not put into writing until the Middle Ages. One of the scripts in there says this: "What was the wood? What the tree out of which heaven and earth were fashioned?" So as long ago as 1700 years BCE, some people recognize the fact that it all came from the tree, that the wood was the beginning. Interesting idea. Julian Norwich, a Christian mystic of the 15th century, wrote, "And in this he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of his hand as it seemed, and it was as round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus: it is all that is made in the hazelnut." Now consider this from the Overstory by Richard Powers. Say the planet is born at midnight and it runs for only one day. First, there is nothing. 2 hours are lost to lava and meteors. Life doesn't show up until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Even then, it's just the barest of self-copying bits and pieces. From dawn to late morning, a million years of branching, nothing more exists than lean and simple cells. Then there is everything. Something wild happens not long after noon. One kind of simple cell enslaves a couple of others. Nuclei get membranes. Cells evolve organelles. What was once a solo campsite grows into a town. The day is 2/3 done when animals and plants part ways, and still life is only single cells. Dusk falls before the compound's life takes hold. Every large living thing is a latecomer, showing up after dark. 9 o'clock in the evening bring jellyfish and worms. Later that hour comes the breakout, backbones, cartilage, an explosion of body forms. From one instant to the next, countless new stems and twigs in the ground burst open and run. Plants make it up on land just before 10 o'clock. Then insects, who instantly take to the air. Moments later, tetrapods crawl up from the tidal muck, carrying around on their skin and in their guts whole worlds of earlier creatures. By 11 p.m., dinosaurs have shot their boat, leaving the mammals and birds in charge for 1 hour. Somewhere in that last 60 minutes, high up in the phylogenetic canopy, life grows aware. Creatures start to speculate. Animals start teaching their children about the past and the future. Animals learn to hold rituals. Anatomically, modern human shows up about 4 seconds before midnight. The first cave paintings appear 3 seconds later. And in the thousands of a click of the second hand, life solves the mystery of DNA and starts to map the tree of life itself. By midnight, most of the globe is converted to row crops for the care and feeding of one species, Homo sapiens. And that's when the tree of life becomes something else again. That's when the giant trunk starts to teeter. I believe that one of the first steps toward the survival of our tree of life is the jettison of the idea of exceptionalism for human beings, as human beings. We really think we're exceptional. We think we're the only thinking beings on this planet. We think we're the only beings that really communicate. Not merely the exceptionalism that drives the national identity of countries, and not only ours, but others. That of being the best, numero uno, we're number one, we like to shout that. We are exceptional, we're not bound by the same laws as everybody else because we're the most powerful. But also the exceptionalism that gives our species, that gives us the right to dominion over the earth and feeds the misconception that the world belongs to us. And of course, our religious tradition does that. It says in the Bible, God gave Adam and all those people dominion over the earth. They were exceptional. They certainly were exceptional. If all those people came from two people, if we started out as two people and suddenly became who we are, it's pretty amazing. But we are not the only sentient beings on this planet by any measure. The study of trees, the recent study of trees in the last few decades, has shown that they communicate with one another. They literally talk to each other. Older trees feed younger trees. When a blight comes into a forest, trees communicate with other trees, warning them of the blight. They call to themselves insects, wasps, to combat beetles. The trees do this. They talk to themselves. They talk to each other. It's through this, the largest, a few years ago they announced the largest found living creature, as called it, on the planet, is larger than the state of Michigan, and it's a mycelia, mushroom, fungus, stretches all the way across the state of Michigan. It is the communication channels of the trees. That's how they communicate. Beneath the surface of the earth, there's a connectedness of mycelium through which life, information, and healing flows. It's called a mycorrhizal network. We are disconnected to the source of our lives as human beings. And that disconnectedness, that sense of exceptionalism, now threatens every existence of life on this planet Earth. I must admit that the thought of this earth as a living community does give me some hope, actually. That even if Homo sapiens turns out to be a failed experiment in that community, if we turn out to be a dead branch on the tree, life will flourish without us. It did before and it will again. Sentience means a multidimensional subjective phenomenon that refers to the depths of awareness and an individual possessing about himself, herself, or others. If that is what sentience is, trees are sentient beings. They're aware of others. They're aware of their own needs, and they communicate that thing through that mycelium underneath the soil. And every handful of soil, there are tens of thousands of life. In every handful, microbial life. A few years back in 2013, I had taken my son, it was 2012 or 13, about that time, took my grandson down to see the last shuttle launch. And while I was down there, I taught him to swim. And we live on 42 acres. It was all forest, only a few clearings, an old shack there when we moved there. Now there's a clearing for a garden and our garage and our cabin and my son's cabin. Not much of a clearing. We're surrounded by trees on all sides. When we moved out there, the land had a natural lakeside in it with one of the best springs in the area that used to provide water for everyone on the ridge. There's a picture our neighbor has of wagons with big barrels where they had lined up on that dirt road at that time to fill their water barrels at the spring that is on our land. It's covered in now. It only flows from under the ground. Back in those days, I'm sure they had a spring box and a pipe. But when we moved out there, we were told the guy who actually wanted to buy it if we didn't said, he could build a lake and 5 houses and make over $1 million on this property. He said it's the most beautiful property he'd seen in Owen County for years, and he appraised it at twice the value of Owen County property at the time. And fortunately, when he told me how much it was, and at that time we didn't have bank accounts. We lived just on a cash basis and rarely had more than $50 at a time. In fact, I remember times when I couldn't buy a bag of cookies, which is really poor for me. But we lived very simply. And we called the old man in Arizona who owned the property and had bought it for his son, who we knew. And his son said, I don't want to live in Owen County. I'm a city boy. My dad likes your politics. He'd probably sell it to you. He was an old communist, actually. I told him the land was worth $42,000, and I said, I don't have $50, but I can make money if you'll settle on contract. And he, consistent with his politics, said, that's way too much money. He sold it to us for $32,000 and $250 a month, and we could have it on contract. And so I went to driving truck, and we spent several years getting things fixed up, building the house and so forth, a small cabin. But I kept thinking about that lake idea. And we thought for a long time we want to build a lake, but we just couldn't get ourselves to cut the trees in the lakeside. It was something we couldn't do. After teaching my grandson to swim, I came back and said, I want to build a lake so he can come swim anytime he wants. And we did. And I have to tell you that those 2 weeks or so that it took the Amish crew that came up and to cut the timber, it was called timber, it wasn't called trees. The Amish crew were good people, came up and cut them. Those are two of the hardest weeks of our married life, I think. I mean, we wept at the sound of trees falling. It was difficult. And now, of course, the lake looks like it's been there for a million years and it's all healed over. But those were very difficult times. And I don't know, had I understood what I do now about the trees, that I could have done that, to be honest with you. I think I might have anyway. We replaced one ecosystem with another and treat the rest. We've got another 40 acres or so that are still all trees. Yesterday, we went on a walk in our woods back to an area that we don't go to very often because it's so rough and steep, which is what has protected it for so many years. There's an oak tree back there, a big white oak. And I took the Amish foreman who was cutting trees, I took him back to that ridge to see them. And the Amish man walked up to that tree and fell on his knees and just held it. And he said, Bill, I don't know how much we'll pay you for this tree. I've never cut one this nice. And I said, well, we're not going to cut it anyway. I just wanted you to see it. Day after day, as they cut the other trees out for the lake site, he would come back and say, we really would like to have that. He said, there's a ridge over there. On that ridge with that white oak, there's about a dozen trees that'll bring you more money than all the trees we've cut so far. And I said, no, we're not going to sell it. He said, it's not the money, is it? And I said, no. I said, I want people to walk back there and fall on their knees just like you did. I want that tree to be here when I die. Well, Glenda doesn't know this. We walked back there yesterday and we measured the circumference of it fairly close. It was something like 120 inches or something. 120 inches, I think, is what we got. 130? Thank you. 130 inches in circumference. So I looked it up this morning on a tree site. How old is that tree? It said that tree probably was born 212 years ago. When James Madison was president, when our flag had 15 stars, started about 1810. 210 years for that tree to be what it is. And it really, it gives me hope. It gives me hope to understand that there are things that will long outlast us. But what we do while we're here is important. The Poor People's Campaign, I'm glad you brought us that information. I hope that we can get people to D.C. It's been a while since I've been to D.C., and I may try to do that. We need to become sentient beings, really sentient beings that are aware of what is around us, that are aware of what we're connected to. Thomas Berry's book, The Dream of Earth, I had a piece in here I was going to read. I don't know where it's at now. But I think what we have to do is get rid of this idea that we're exceptional. We're not exceptional. We're just who we are. We're life. We're life with the trees. As we walked the woods yesterday with my son and our dog, spring's happening. Spring is happening. Give me those pictures, John. We'll go through these. I just wanted to bring you some beautiful signs that it really is. Winter's done left. We got a little cold left, but I think we got some pictures here I took yesterday. And Glenda, you tell me what the flowers are, because I don't remember. We'll get them up here in a minute. What I want to say to you is we need to get out of our exceptionalist shell, and we need to learn to commune with the other life forms around us. Doesn't mean we all have to be vegans, although I respect vegans greatly. It doesn't mean we all have to be anything except really sentient beings who have awareness of who we are and who others are. Sentient beings is a multi-dimensional subjective phenomenon that refers to the depths of awareness of an individual possesses about himself, herself, and others. This is not my picture. I borrowed this picture, but it really does say a whole lot about what I'm talking about. That trees regenerate themselves again and again and again. They are the creators of life on this planet. They really are. And it's amazing. They're amazing. Next picture is what kind of flower? Bloodroot flower. This is just blooming. This is the first time we've seen them this year. And next? Anemone? Thank you, Glenda. You can get lost staring at a flower like this. That's who?
Periwinkle.
Periwinkle.
And
It's
I know that
it's an invasive.
things that is supposed to be is considered an invasive, but we've had them at the edge of our woods since we moved out there 30 years ago, and they've not gone any further than just the edge of the woods. Somebody left them there.
Yeah, we've leave them there.
These beautiful purple flowers blooming every spring.
And I have this discussion with people about invasive plants. What is the most invasive life form on this planet? Anybody want to be in that group? Whether you like it or not, we are the most invasive life form. If the trees and everything else ever get together, we're in trouble. We are the invasive ones. And sure, I think there are some things we try to control, but we have a plant around our lake that came in. We didn't plant it. And we have people come in, oh, you got to get rid of that. You got to spray. You got to do this. I don't spray around my lake. And then I find out they've been trying to get rid of that plant in Massachusetts for 400 years and we've never gotten rid of it. It's a crazy battle. We need to understand what invasiveness really means, and it is our species that is most invasive. Is there any more? What is that? That's, oh, it's a bloodroot. Okay. Ah, yeah.
That was a ground ivy, I'm not sure.
Ground ivy, okay. I know what this is. This is grandmother beech tree. This is a tree that Glenda told the loggers. This is on near the area where the lake was. And they said, do not touch that tree. Be careful when they brought the logs out. They even watched because they was afraid they'd damage that tree. And this is a tree that Glenda has been in love with since we moved onto the property. Another one, this tree right here is a tree that Glenda goes to pray on. It's a sycamore. Go ahead, John. I want to show the bottom of it. You see how life just takes off at the bottom of these trees? The moss, there's the one that Glenda goes to pray. Glenda goes there, and I go with her sometimes. Sometimes I go by myself. Sometimes when life just doesn't make any sense at all. Sometimes when your heart is broken. Sometimes when you're in pain. You go sit with a tree. The tree listens. The tree sends out life. It's no accident that the DNA is like a tree, that our life tree, we have trees of life, we have family trees. It's no accident. It's because that is where it begins. I think we need to find ways to recognize who we really are. Who we really are is just one member of a family of life. I don't believe that there's any God that created us separately from the rest of the life on this planet. What I do believe is that life is sacred, and that we have to find ways to live within that sacredness. And science can't do it alone. Religion can't do it alone. But if you really, if we really stop and think about it, and realize our not exceptionalism, but our relatedness to all of life, it will change the way we walk. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, we should walk on the earth as if our feet is kissing the earth. Walk as if your feet are kissing the earth. I hope that, I encourage you to check out the book, The Overstory by Richard Power. It's rather dense. There are a few places where you have to read very carefully, but it's a tremendous novel. It's based on real people's lives who were protecting the redwoods and sequoias in Oregon and Washington. But it's a novel, and it's a wonderful read. It'll change the way you look at trees.
Break not the circle of enabling
closing words is a poem that may very well have been the first poem you ever memorized. It's probably the first one I ever memorized, by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair and having perhaps a better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first one for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I encourage you to take roads less traveled once in a while. Take roads toward justice once in a while. Take a road toward love instead of hatred once in a while. Take a road toward forgiveness, because without the learning to forgive, we will never learn how to live. I believe that very strongly.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace. Know that you are loved and that your life is sacred.